This week, Emmet talks with Evan McGorray, translator of the French graphic novel Call Me Nathan, a coming-of-age story about a transgender man by Castro with art by Quentin Zuttion. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. Deconstructing Comics earns a bit of money from your purchase that helps us keep the show going. We really appreciate your support. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Deconstructing Comics. My name is Emmet and I'm on the line with Evan McGorray. Welcome to the show, Evan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This is an interview with a bit of a difference, I believe. I haven't gone through the Deconstructing Comics archives. I don't know how many times we've actually interviewed a translator of comics, but I think it's a fascinating topic, and that's beside the fact that one of our hosts is himself a translator of comics, Kumar is Romanian, who translates a lot of manga into English.
Oh, God.
Yes. Using the news lately because he left a gig in quite a spectacular fashion. there was a fascinating interview with him, which went viral. But I am fascinated in what you folks do and how you approach language, particularly in respect of comics, and how dialogue works when you're adapting it from one culture to another culture.
Yeah.
And the reason I reached out to you is because I read Castro and Quentin Zuttion's Call Me Nathan, which is a semi-fictional biography of a young trans man coming out to their family and friends. It's originally published in French, and I believe Castro is a journalist by trade, so there's a sort of, it's almost a semi-fictional reportage at work here. And you're translating from the French to English, and this is your bailiwick. This is where you're a Francophile, I gather.
Yeah, I'm very into French culture, French perspectives on pretty much everything. They always have their own take. And they definitely have a world of comics, but it's a different take on comics.
Yeah, well, for them it's le neuvième art, isn't it? It's the ninth art. They see it as an actual legitimate art form, not an embarrassment, not a cultural embarrassment.
Yeah. I'm to the dismay of my of my bank account, because every comics are a hardback comic, and it's, if you go to France, you'll have to have a weight limit to how many comics you can buy.
Yeah, the albums, exactly, because they're quite thick and weighty, but some of them are gorgeous. I'm going through a bit of a fantasy kick at the moment, and I was searching for fantasy reads, and I came across a French series, the BD series, and it's called the Quest for the Time Bird in English, I believe. Okay. And that looks like right up my alley, so I'm going to give that a go. But yeah, I was curious about how you got involved. Okay, well, how did you get involved in this? But were you involved in comics before a translator, or was this an early piece of translation in comics for you? Yeah,
so I kind of fell into this. I feel like most translators fall into being a translator. It's not always their lot in life, but it kind of is just something that they have a passion for, sharing these like cross-culture exchanges. So I went to school for French language studies, imagining myself that I was going to be a teacher, because that's kind of how at least the U.S. education system sets you up if you're learning a language. But I was teaching English in France for a while, and I fell in love with just French comic culture, going to the library, checking out all the racks and racks of comics they have. And so many of them aren't translated. So when I bought a few and brought them back to the United States, and I was trying to share them with my friends, it was kind of impossible to share an untranslated book, and it's kind of difficult to do so. I'm sure your readers have experience with that, or listeners rather.
Well, I'll share a personal anecdote with you. I was in Brussels years ago, and I very drunkenly emailed a friend of mine back in Dublin that I was going to translate all of Jodorowsky's Technopair into English for him because I was like, "You need to read this."
Yes, that was exactly how I came into.
I never did complete that task.
Someday. Yeah, there's just so many niche comics that just never get the attention they probably fully deserve just because they haven't been translated. But there's definitely like a whole world of people who appreciate them. But the one comic that kind of got me into just like the comic world and trying to share them with my friends in the United States was Satania, I think is the English translation. It's one of the Veilman and Carasquet comics. And just like wild art, wild narrative. I just maybe jump into comics, and I was just like translating them by hand, and then I would read them to my friends. Like I would have get-togethers where they would like have the book in their hands, and I would be reading every cell. So it was kind of like a sort of salon, if you will, for comics. So I kind of naturally went into other comics and doing that again. It was pretty fun. And then during the pandemic, I was like the lockdown, I really dove into like the art of translation and kind of teaching myself how to translate properly. There's a lot of formatting when it comes to translating comics. Yeah, I can go into that in depth, but we can leave the conversation elsewhere.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff because, yes, it was first published in English in 2022 by Self-Made Hero. So was this a COVID project for you?
So I had bought the book during COVID. Well, not during COVID. During the lockdown, before anyone had thought of translating it, or at least as far as I know, just because I had been translating a few other trans stories because there wasn't really much translation done from French to English, and I'm just fascinated by the transgender perspective when it comes to France. So I had bought the book before even thinking about translating it. So it was kind of a funny coincidence. So I had got a DM from someone on Twitter, Jeffrey Zuckerman. He's a translator, and he had said that someone was approached to translate Call Me Nathan, but they weren't exactly comfortable translating it because it wasn't they didn't have any life experience with being trans or trans non-binary or in the LGBTQ community. So they were trying to kind of diversify the field, I guess. And I took the opportunity, and I'm so grateful for everyone who thought of me. And so that led me to translating it in earnest, getting a contract for that literary world, publishing industry, learning all of that as well. So it was a learning experience all around, I think.
Yeah, that's a very rapid learning curve. It's very steep and rapid learning curve. But it's fascinating that the other translator passed on the gig, because in addition to the trans experience, which is featured here, we also have the idea of translating from French culture into English culture. And I think over email, I was saying to you, I was interested in how you approach that idiom too, because you've translated in such a way that I think any English-speaking person can plug into the mindset of these characters straight away. But I was reading it, and I was thinking about a French teenager, how a French teenager might speak, and then how an English teenager or an English-speaking country's teenager might speak. And there's some lines here. There was your hookup with Clara was shady, which is immediately understood. I know exactly what's being implied there, but I was trying to think of that in the French. I was like, how would that go? That would be different. That would be phrased differently.
Yeah, so there's definitely some slang involved that's very like particular. Like I think that there's also some texting as well. So that was kind of a fun problem to tackle and make sure it had the right tone, it was preserving the original French text too. So yeah, that was definitely something that I worked together with the publisher, and then it was also a UK publisher, so there was that aspect too, where it was a UK translation, so some things that I just don't know about because I'm not from the UK, so had to be some things had to be changed to make sure that it was for the UK audience.
We should mention as well that the publisher is Self-Made Hero, and I've loved a lot of their biographical and non-fiction graphic novels. Previously, I interviewed Fionnuala Doran about her comic for Self-Made Hero, The Trial of Roger Casement, which again is a major part of queer history from our Irish history. So I really value the fact that their output is covering all these angles.
Yeah.
And covering all this content, because I don't know anywhere else that's putting that out, really. So yeah, no, just giving props to Self-Made Hero for that. But yeah, again, that idea of not only translating the language, but translating the issues into the, let's say, specifically UK cultural space. I looking at the landscape in the UK as far as the trans experience is concerned, I don't know what's happened to them. They've gone weird. Yeah. The English, look, I have views on the English, so we'll put that to one side for now. But they seem to have become obsessed with this in a negative way. My suspicion is that it's all distraction from endemic issues across the political sphere in England generally. I'm not asking you to comment on that.
I've read, let's see the book. Yeah, The Transgender Issue by Sean Fay is a really good examination of what the UK trans experience is like.
It seems to occupy a lot of time in the media cycle, and again, purely negatively. It seems to be a very fraught issue. I don't know why J.K. Rowling's every pronouncement is treated as front page news, and that only seems to embed more of those views. So I was really moved by Call Me Nathan, because I felt what Castro had done with this sort of accounting of is it her nephew? A semi version of her nephew?
It's neighbor. Yeah, so
neighbor.
I'm pretty sure they were neighbors. Or like it's Catherine's family friends.
Got it.
Yeah. So not a family member, so it's kind of an outsider's perspective of how the family's feeling. Obviously, she interviewed the family, and they're close. There's several interviews with the real life Nathan Lucas. Since it was published in French, there's been a lot of talk in the French culture. Like they have a lot of programs that they like discuss literature on television, and they've had a television interview about it. So it's like he's pretty open to what it's like, and he like offered his real life feelings about the reaction to the book, which there hasn't been any backlash as far as I'm aware. So I'm very grateful for that, because that was one of my worries that I had. I was just like, oh no, is the first translation that I'll ever do going to be something that's going to be some sort of attack? I don't know. That's always in the back of your mind, I think, if you're going to be attaching your name to something like this, if it's going to go anywhere in that direction, which I'm glad it hasn't. I think I've only received anything positive.
Well, again, it's. I mean, I that makes me sad, because it is, as I said, a very moving work, and one of the reasons why I find it so emotionally engaging as a reader is because I feel the character of Nathan gets to have conversations which are complicated conversations and not very sort of one note, good, bad, moral equivalencies. Like it's very much everybody has their own stake in this. Everybody has a sense of what they believe, and then over the course of the story, those things shift.
Yeah.
And I think that's. I love the fact that we were talking about the teenagers and the texting and all the rest. But I love that there's this sort of very open discussion about Nathan among their peers, where it's like, is it a sexuality thing? Is it a gender thing? Is it, they're just talking about it, and that's maybe where I was coming at before with the idea of cultural difference, because I felt much more open to me than like
Yeah.
when I was growing up, and it was like everything had to be done sort of very circumspect. Whereas this is just, let's just talk about all this.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with the way the teachers were acting, and that just a lot of different parts were kind of reassuring in a way. That's like, oh, the kids are all right. That kind of feeling you get when you think 10 years ago things were completely different, or 5 years ago even. Just things changed a lot quicker than we can imagine, and I'm sure that these kids feel the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
Coming up, Evan talks about the need to use more direct language in the translation of Call Me Nathan, and more. Old comics can be pretty amusing. Don't you love it? The $sign on the bag.
Yeah.
That means it has money in it. And the early issues of Amazing Spider-Man are no exception.
And there's this line about Mark Twain in here, which has to be the funniest thing Stan Lee ever wrote.
Join me, Tim, along with a rotating cast of Emmet.
Yes, let's Snopes.com this issue of Spider-Man.
Patrick.
Haha, I'm here! Now you must feel my wrath.
And Kumar.
To say you just hit the jackpot about herself is so great.
As we make our way through the transition from Ditko to Ramita, and Peter Parker's transition from being a high school student with a doting aunt,
Aunt May's wearing a Peter, Peter's wearing an Aunt May,
to a college student with his own pad, facing the big questions in life.
Why is Gwen having a party on a Sunday?
It's Spider-Man transitions, along with Spidey's early years discussed in Spider-Man 1963, when Pete's romantic life was nothing but stress.
Oh, he hates me because he looked at my coffee cup.
We raise all the big questions. Why do you put these two wimpy guys in suits and ties to guard a super strong man? Our patrons are enjoying Spider-Man transitions. Paul Spence wrote, "Gentlemen, you provided some very funny commentary on this issue. This was a great episode and it was very funny. Keep up the great work."
It just seemed unlikely that, he would go into melee with the Rhino and not get his arm snapped.
Support us at patreon.com/deconcomics for at least $4 a month to hear our monthly podcast as we move toward issue 50.
This is the last face you'll see. And then he puts on the Green Goblin mask. He's like, no, this is the last face you'll see.
Support us at patreon.com/deconcomics.
Sawate. My name is Stella, and I am the host of Batgirl to Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast. Batgirl to Oracle is a podcast dedicated to Barbara Gordon, the first woman to hold the mantle of Batgirl for an extended period of time, roughly 1967 to 1988. The goal of Batgirl to Oracle is to examine the character's history from her first appearance as Batgirl and continuing through her tenure as Oracle. Each episode looks at a vintage issue of Detective Comics or Batman, as well as other books like Justice League and Freedom Fighters, and modern issues of Batgirl and Birds of Prey. I also keep track of news involving Batgirl and other members of the Bat family, and I have a revolving series of segments like Babs in the Tube, which highlights appearances of Babs in TV and film, Shipper Spotlight, which looks at a variety of comic and pop culture couples, gives their history, and determines whether they are hot or not, Reading with Stella, which could be described as an audio drama, or just me reading a book that relates to Babs or doesn't, and of course, the mainstay literature recommendation. I have been blessed to interview writers Scott Beatty and Chuck Dixon on their Batgirl Year 1 work, Brian Q. Miller on his Batgirl run, Dwayne Swarzynski and Christy Marks on their separate Birds of Prey work, and the creators and actors of the Batgirl Spoiled, the web series. I hope to interview more creators and actors in the future. My goal, most importantly, is to make a fun, entertaining, and thoughtful show that people enjoy and from which they learn. Find the show online at thebatmanuniverse.net and iTunes, and follow the show on Facebook and Twitter at Batgirl to Oracle. Thank you, and fly on, Babs lovers.
So you came on board, you were translating from the French to English. Did you have much to do with the creators, with Castro and Zuttion?
So we had, after I had translated it, we had a bit of back and forth with just making sure that they were okay with the translation. Sometimes that's something that will happen with the contract. If you're an English publisher, like the original authors will have final say over a translation. I think that's specific to a contract, but that was the case for this translation. So they had a few examples where I kind of was operating from the place of being careful about these issues, and their feedback kind of made me realize that I shouldn't be being careful. I should be making this a statement. It should, like, this translation should be its own statement in itself. Like, we shouldn't be shying away from something. And I feel like that was a very French perspective that I think even me and the publisher all needed, like, because the publisher and I had agreed on something, and then we had got their feedback, and then they convinced us to go their way, which I think was the right choice. And there are a few other examples of that. Like, even the cover, there was some conversation whether or not the cover image would be the one we would use, if we would pick another image. I don't remember what the other images were. I don't remember, but exactly. But there was discussion whether it would be risque for a UK bookstore to be carrying this. So that was part of the discussion, which was pretty interesting to see, or to have an inside ear into.
Yeah, I think if we talk about the book itself, Nathan's body is depicted in a number of sequences that the issue of body dysmorphia is rendered in a very graphic way.
Yeah.
Because it's their perspective on their own body.
Right.
And it's very impactful. There's a couple of almost nightmare sequences that really just communicate so much. So I was interested in talking to you as well, just in terms of how you were speaking around that, or how you were rendering the words around that, because the visual of this is very impactful. I'm interested in how the creators were asking you and the publisher to be a little more forthright, because I was wondering if the feedback would be, because you are redoing the lettering in effect. I was wondering if there was going to be feedback about placement of dialogue on the page, or you're obscuring the art, but no, they were actually saying, no, the words you're using need to be more direct.
Yeah, like I think there was some discussion, I don't remember which exactly, it's been a while since I actually translated this. I can't remember the exact passage, but there was a time, I think it was maybe when they were talking to the city hall or something like that, where they were I was kind of offering a politically correct, if you will, translation of like something that they were saying to each other, or even like using swear words and slurs like that, or choosing which slur to pick was a charged, I guess, experience translating those passages, definitely.
I was laughing at your description just a moment ago about concerns over the cover, because if you go to an English-speaking comic book store and you walk along the rack, you will see all the various feminine bodies with like busting out features.
Yeah.
That's fine, Wonder Woman straddling a villain and showing the world everything. That's fine. But the prepubescent body on the cover of this book, that's a concern. That's we're in a bizarre, twisted cultural space at the moment, I feel.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But I feel like it's just something you have to over worry about, and then you're like, why was I worrying about that? I guess from my perspective, at least. Yeah.
Very good. So the work came out in French. It was, as you say, discussed. It was something that was featured on panel shows. You have the subject of this work making themselves known to the media as well, which I'm fascinated by. How have you found its reception in English? How have you found the reviews? I know I saw Broken Frontier give you a very positive review, and they're a fine website as well. How have you found its reception in English?
Yeah, it's all been pretty great receptions from what I've seen. I guess just to mention, translators are often overlooked, so everything that I was reading was never made mention of the translation process or anything like that. Or it wouldn't usually. That's just something that doesn't really happen. If you're a translator, you don't really expect the lauds and the I don't know. You don't expect it, and right now at least. But yeah, so it's kind of been like I've been a fly on the wall looking at these reactions because I'm like, oh, they liked it, but they don't know that I did it. Like,
Yeah, well, I noticed you because I was like, well, this is clearly refiguring how this would work.
Yeah.
There's like, as I said, you've got the cultural differences and the language differences, and but the specific issue of trans identity, I feel, needs to be broached to an English-speaking market in a particular way, because so much of the media narrative has become concentrated. So that's why I was conscious of you as well. I was figuring this is somebody who's coming into the space, and I'm interested in this idea of choosing your words, literally, in this case. Could you maybe speak more on that? I just feel as if there's something we're circling around almost.
yeah, I feel like it has to be natural. Like when I'm reading a comic, it has, like, if people are speaking, if you're reading a book, it doesn't have to be, sometimes it doesn't have to be a natural, because you can add in said so-and-so in this way, or like you can add that context to make it have more of an ambiance, but there's like such a kind of reaction you get when you see a word with an image, and then you have to match how the image feels while also changing the translation to match the image. So there's a lot of things you have to kind of figure out. Like another translation that I've been working on, like it could have been translated, she felt this way or she looked this way. So it's like, okay, but she has bags under her eyes, so maybe she looks this way. Or like you make those decisions often based on the image and how the image makes you feel, and which like word to use for a noun, for a verb, or even which person's talking. Like over the course of the comic, you'll kind of develop a voice for each character if they speak enough, of course, because sometimes there's just people who just pass in and out and you don't really have to worry about it. But then you want to make sure that someone is going to be using the same words again if they show up later. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, that's interesting. I mean, I did notice the drifting narration, like particularly with the mother, that
Yeah.
jumped out at me. I thought her narration was very clearly identifiable. That was interesting. I was thinking about, are we in this bind literally, like as in the issues around gender in the English speaking West, literally because of language? Because in French, you have the tu form and the vous form. You have this idea of, if you don't know somebody very well, you refer to them as they.
Yeah.
There's a very formal way of doing it. Or you use the word that they would use for they, but that you're still saying you.
For they, you would have to do, like, you would still gender them. So then there's the whole idea of the third gender in French. So, like, they'll have their own way. Like, there's a whole non-binary kind of subculture of people who are using this language, but it's not accepted by everyone because there's always those right-wingers who want to control the language in its entirety. So there's that whole aspect of the French language that's kind of why I was diving into these French books about trans identity, because I was kind of wondering how I should be talking in French. Like, I'm a non-binary person, I use they, them pronouns in English. So how would I work in French? So I haven't been back to France since probably 2018 or so. So like I've been kind of out of the loop, I guess, if you will, from like actual French speakers. So I'm definitely interested in that topic, and that doesn't really come up in Call Me Nathan.
Well, again, you would have to explain that concept to the English speaking reader. They wouldn't they wouldn't have the tools.
Yeah. So it's definitely a complex thing where another translation that's using the same kind of, I don't know how you would call it, trans French or like non-binary French. Like, how would you add in special ways of writing to make it known to the English reader that this French writer wasn't using regular French language? So it's like this whole thing that doesn't really come up in this book, luckily. So I feel like that would be another barrier for the reader. And I feel like this book kind of breaks down any barriers that the reader might have. And that's why I'm so glad that it's a graphic novel, because that's something that always brings me back to what a graphic novel, like there's so many like graphic guides of how to, or like learning things through graphic novels, and I guess that's a novel thing these days.
Appreciate the pun. Have you read Maya Kobabe's Genderqueer?
I have not. It's on my list.
Yeah, no, I know it's there's so much out there which I'm grateful for, because I think this is what we need for the conversation. We need these texts to be out there so people have points of reference. But one of the things about Genderqueer, the book, is that there is a long sequence within the character's life where they're just settling on the correct pronoun for them.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an interesting, they're meeting all these different people who have their own take on that.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is bound up with different cultural movements in America in the 60s and 70s, where people were working out. You've got the Zay-Zem, which I hadn't heard before. And yeah, the discussion in Genderqueer is fascinating, because it's just like, well, let's actually talk about this. Let's actually give an accounting of a people working out how to use gender in language. But again, I think one of the issues there is that these are treated as neologisms. They're seen as not natural.
Right.
Which is always a funny thing with language, because language is a response to the experience of the people speaking.
Exactly.
Yeah. The French might disagree with that, because I think they've got a very controlled understanding of French.
Right.
But yeah, I've always been interested in language in that respect. It's a sort of reaction. It's the ripple in the water. So yeah, Genderqueer is great for that. But I love that you're saying we could have touched on all these things in the French, but the English don't have it, so we can't do it.
Right.
Although apparently, isn't it? Again, there was the idea the English used to have it, and it's gone now.
Yeah.
They're using more they them.
Used Chaucer. Like Chaucer used it all the time. So way back then they were doing it, but yeah. They have to take it with the program, I think.
Well, there you go. There's your core text right there, folks. It's in Chaucer. Very good. Well, no, as I said, I really enjoy Call Me Nathan. I think it's fantastic work. I commend you for taking on this task as well, and actually rolling this out for an English-speaking audience. It's a beautiful book. For those listening, I guess I'll give you the warning. It's an emotional roller coaster. I was very, I keep using the expression, I was very moved by it, but I'm trying to convey just how much I was sucked into this. So, congratulations to you. Are you going to continue translating from French to English in comics, or are you looking for general translation work now?
Yeah, I like the niche of comics. It's kind of a nice place to be. Like I think there's an endless supply of things to translate. It's definitely a small group of people. So it's Edward Gauvin. I don't know if you know him. He's a translator. He translates a lot of French to English. He's one of my people that I look up to. He's actually the person who passed on this graphic novel. So I'm grateful to him. But I have another graphic novel, same subject material, but from the perspective of the mom. So it's called Transitions, A Mother's Journey, and it'll be out in October in the United States at least.
And who's that coming out from? Do you know the publisher?
Top Shelf Productions.
Oh wow, great! Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
You're moving up the comic publisher ladder.
Slowly but surely, yeah.
Very good. Well, look, I look forward to that, because I want to read more of this stuff. I think the more that is said, the more that is out there, these issues, the more fruitful conversation we can have, I guess.
Yes.
In the wider sense. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on?
I don't think so.
Good.
Yeah, I would just suggest anyone listening to look into any of Quentin's Quentin, if you use a French accent, any of Quentin's other illustrations. He's a fantastic illustrator. And I know a lot of them haven't been translated yet, so watch this space, I guess, hopefully. Yeah, I love his art style. That's what drew me to the book in the first place. And I know a lot of readers did as well. He has a fan following. So he's definitely a person to watch out for. I think he won a major prize at Angoulême this year.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Props to Quentin. Quentin.
Yeah.
And your website is evantranduit.com, so it's EVANTRADUIT.
Yep, exactly.
I love that traductoris. That's gorgeous.
Yeah. That's a little taste of the non-binary French.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Well, Evan, thank you for your time. Thanks so much for coming on Deconstructing Comics.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Call Me Nathan is published in English by Self-Made Hero. Evan's site is evantraduit.com. That's EVANTRADUIT.com. It's DCP In Touch, where we hear from our listeners. We've been getting a fair amount of comments via YouTube, where each episode is published automatically by our podcast host, with that episode's featured image shown for the entire video. I do wish it could be a real video, but there are only so many hours in the day. Anyway, on to the comments. Arv Prinja commented on episode 747, where Jason and I talked about Suzanne, the Jazz Age goddess of tennis. Arv says, I was simply amazed by this book. A lovely work of art, and what an idea in the first place. Makes me wish there was more great stuff like that about the history of tennis. On the other hand, this should remain unique. Bizarre Brain commented on our first Commandy discussion, issues 1 through 10. Note that the gorillas swinging and climbing could have been inspired by Planet of the Apes novel, which had them doing that. Okay, interesting. I have not read that. As I mentioned in the show, I'm really new to Planet of the Apes. I watched the first movie for the first time ever in preparation for that episode, and have not read any of the books for sure. Magnet F commented on episode 769, where I talked with Tracy Butler about the Lackadaisy pilot. And he says, he or she, they, Tracy is genuinely my top favorite artist. Like reading through the comic and seeing how much she improved with her art is so inspiring to me and makes me want to improve and explore more about my art. Yeah, I'd like to get back into my art too, but doing too much podcasting. And Mark Shulusky comments on episode 770, the second installment of Commandy, issues 11 through 18. Kirby's writing has been much criticized over the years, but Commandy was brilliant. He wrote satire that never descended into parody. The story as a narrative was presented in such a way that the parallels could be coincidence. Yes, even the giant gorilla, Tiny. Where is this movie franchise? Yeah, I'd watch that if it was done well. And DC hasn't had much luck with movies, but maybe we'll see an improvement here coming up. But thanks for the comments, everyone. If you're listening to us somewhere other than YouTube, you can drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Otherwise, of course, you can leave a comment on YouTube. Mail@deconstructingcomics.com is the same place to send us your work for critiquing comics. Speaking of which, I've been hearing a lot from creators whose work we've already discussed on critiquing comics, sending us their next issue or whatever, and that's fine, we're happy to get them. But I'd really like to see comics from creators who haven't sent us work before. Again, that's mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Send us your work to talk about. If you've enjoyed this week's show or any other Deconstructing Comics episodes, tell your friends. Share your favorite episodes on your social media. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube by clicking our social media buttons at deconstructingcomics.com. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Emmet and I are back with the next installment of our walk through Jack Kirby's series Commandy, the Last Boy on Earth, this time focusing on issues 19 through 23, as Commandy visits what appears to be 1920s Chicago, and then moves on to Monster Lake. That's next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.